If you'd like to pick up any of the cards that you see in today's video, then I have to point you guys onto 3 Mana Inc., the best place in Canada to get your DBS and Digimon sealed and single products. Links will be down in the description. Hey everybody, Espira, and we're back with another Dragon Ball Super card game video. Today, we're going to be covering how Best of One Presided changes the game and effectively means that you have to go into your tournaments with a completely new state of mind. If you're looking for cards just to be able to tech into your sideboard going into the future Best of One metas, then I definitely recommend you guys just that corner. You guys go check that video at the end of this one where I basically go every staple you're expected to look at when you're considering what to build in your sideboard. Best of One Presided effectively changes how the game is played entirely. And we've seen this once before. So of course, a game is best of 3. The most competitive high level of this game has been best of 3. And then before, everything got locked down, best of 3 was how this game was played. However, going into webcam tournaments and webcam regionals and effectively the webcam state of the world, Best of Ones has taken over as the predominant way to play the game. Not the best, not the most competitive. Don't angry comment down below talking about how yada, 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 Best of One. I'm not here to hear it. But there's no doubt that the way the Dragon Ball Super card game has been played for the past couple of years, most predominantly has been Best of One webcams. And what that did was effectively change the way the game was played, right? You had more fragile decks be able to do extremely well because your opponent couldn't side for what you were doing. So we saw, OTK decks like Reboot Gohan and Majin Vegeta do incredibly well. King Vegeta before the erratas, these very linear, very explosive strategies. Hand destruction is another big one where there are plenty of tools to deal with them. If you are dealing with an aggro deck, you can Protector of the People and prevent yourself. You can bring in more negates if you're going up against like Reboot Gohan. If you're playing against hand destruction, there's a bevy of cards that are able to draw you cards, Saiyan Instincts, Dabura, etc. But because those aren't really main deckable options for a lot of decks, like I can't main deck Dabura in most of the decks I run because having the black card that's dead against other matchups is actually just like a super feels bad. So on that front, it's incredibly tough. And even more so for cards like Jiren, where they really only do something against one card. And they're incredibly powerful silver bullets and they're great for your sideboard. But to mainboard them for a lot of decks is just not a viable option. So that's where we had the first shift in the game. Best of One meant that, a lot of room was able to open up for decks that were way more fragile, but way more explosive and way more punishing because you didn't have a sideboard to deal with them. Now, with us shifting into Best of One Presets. Now, I do want to state that this isn't the official way the game's being played at the moment. They're just testing it for DBS Fest. But I actually do think that moving forward past DBS Fest, it'll be so well received that that's how future regionals are going to be held. I have no doubt that this test is going to come out as a success, and that's where Best of One tournaments are going to go from here on out. You have another tonal shift now. Now we're kind of pivoting in this in-between state of Best of Threes and Best of Ones, where now those fragile decks are back in a really tough position. Hand control, which was dominated by Cell Surge and now is not as strong considering the other leaders you have to run, but it's still an option people can run, is way worse because going into game 1, I see you have a green leader, I can just start bringing in those cards. And like, you might not be hand destruction, but odds are if you're a green deck, you're probably running Bupo, and if you're running Bupo, I can just run those Daboras into that instead, right? So that's where you really have to be careful now when you're picking your deck, and it always starts with your deck choices. Best of 3 had, hey, can you win a post-sideboarded game? Best of One was, hey, can you deal with my explosiveness? And if not, I just win out, right? Or what I'm trying to do, my very linear strategy. Best of One Presided is this weird in-between world where, how hard can your deck get sided into and can you deal with a post-sided game and only having one game to try and figure out what your opponent is doing? So it all starts with your deck choice, right? Now we're in a world where hand control, not so much, but maybe you're running a leader that can, fake out an opponent by making them think you're running one version, but you're actually running another. Like Soul Striker, let's say. There are like 3 different builds of Soul Striker. You can go mono blue, you can go blue yellow, you can go blue red, all of which are being heavily tested right now for the next meta. And then it's up to your opponent to try and guess what strategy you're going into, right? And they all kind of play very different style of games. So there's that kind of just trying to figure out what your opponent, and it's going to be super key to start understanding what the meta looks like and what your opponents are trying to do. The specific thing though now is that main deck doesn't matter anymore. You're not in a position where you have to consider like, oh, sideboard, oh, main board, because effectively you're no longer restricted to just what is your main deck to go into the game. I will say this isn't the same for tournaments where it's going to be Best of One Swiss into Best of 3 Top Cut. Then you have some considerations for your main board to get, okay, if I make it to day 2, I actually need to warp my main deck to make sense for the meta so that I have a better chance of winning game 1. However, when we're just talking about best of one, and for webcams, it does seem like we're going to continue on not having top cuts into best of threes. So it's just going to be best of one pre-sides. It doesn't matter anymore. You could run, so my Red U7 list that I'm testing right now is a pile of 75 cards. And some main deck cards kind of don't make sense, but it doesn't matter because going into game one, I can go ahead and just flat out be ready for any position I need. And before the game goes, you can build the best main deck you can for every single matchup. And that's how you have to go into this best of one pre-sided meta with as a notion to keep you kind of, build around it. What best pile of main deck plus sideboard cards can I build to attack every single matchup the best way I can? And at that point, it really changes how you're going to think about deck building. And it kind of gives you some freedom, right? Because there are some give and takes when you're talking about best of three and what you main board and what you sideboard. Now you're just kind of in the perfect position. You're going to be able to build the perfect version of your deck for every single matchup, every single time you face it, as long as within your best 75 cards, if you're going max out on your deck, you take into account exactly everything that you need. Again, though, that does mean that some decks are not as viable as they were. Hand destruction, again, now you can just kind of bring in any hand destruction hate, which, at that point, you're just kind of betting that no one is really running it because they assume hand destruction is not going to be around. But if you're doing that, I think you're doing yourself a big disservice. Wombo combo decks, 18 mil is incredibly strong in best of one. In best of one pre-side, you can bring in the things that remove the combo or deal with the tokens or whatnot. Like if you're in red, funny enough, you can actually tech in the one drop baby that like Union Fusions, and then you can just eat all the tokens. It's a very specific card to slot in, but it technically can be slotted in. And blue, which blue's in this top position that it has the most silver bullets. Between the Borgoses of the world, you have so many different ways of being able to attack Soul Striker and other blue leaders way to untap energy. That's kind of tough. But that's kind of how you that's the perfect pivot into, okay, well then how do we actually build the best 75, the best 65 that we can? And that's specifically by proactive sideboarding. There are two ways to sideboard. There is sideboarding to deal with matchups that you have a tough time with or to mitigate things that your opponent is trying to do, right? So against hand destruction, for example, I bring in Deborahs, I bring in Saiyan Instincts, I bring in Bardock Apes to be able to draw cards. That's trying to deal with what my opponent is doing. But if you want a proactive sideboard, that's okay. Well, you level up one step beyond that. And it's like, well, what's my opponent going to bring in to deal with what I'm going to do? So if you're playing Soul Striker, and it's a good deck, it's going to do a lot of good things, but be aware that a lot of sideboards, if not most of them, are going to have the blue silver bullets in them. You need to sideboard with that in mind to how you deal with their sideboarding plan. So be proactive in your sideboarding and recognize that if you're a deck that can get hated, if you're going to play a hand control deck, if you're going to play a blue deck, bring in side options that deal with what your opponent's going to do because you're going to be playing the game with those silver bullets in mind. If you're playing a hand destruction deck and you don't want them to bore you, Black Mass Saiyan, bring that in. I don't think Black Mass Saiyan is in a great spot right now because a lot of decks deal with them. And if anything, I feel like it's almost a waste of one energy. But those are the kinds of plays you need to start considering when you're building for this format. And that's the give and take. You're in a spot where you can take the perfect version of your deck for every matchup. But take into account that you're now in a world where your opponent will have the perfect version of dealing against your deck. And if you're a deck that gets hated out by silver bullets or by specific cards, you need ways to get around that. And it's not just limited to blue. If your opponent plays cards that prevent you from attacking with big beefy battle cards, like we saw with the World Championship, where Juan Soto wasn't able to attack into Andrew Duval for like 4 turns because the Vegeta Unison just prevented him from being able to attack with his bodies. Those are the cards you need to think about. How am I going to deal with this? And that's how you need to start going into this, which is why it's such a huge shift. We saw, we are now going into the third era of this card game, where effectively your leader choices and your side cards are going to dominate how the tournaments are going to play out. And that's kind of been how best of one's been. In best of 3, you can kind of weigh your options. In best of 1, original best of 1s, you could be a lot more linear. I mean, even me, like I've topped with Ram Gogeta, and I don't think that was really going to be a thing if it was pre-side games because they could just deal with my Veku and deal with like the blue stuff. It's a very hateable deck. Now we're leveling up one step beyond that, and we're in best of 1 pre-sides. And these are the kinds of things you need to start considering. How's my opponent going to deal with me? How am I going to deal with them? And on a level up beyond that, how am I going to deal with them dealing with me? And the ones who can do that best and can build their best 65 to 75 are going to be the ones who have a huge leg up on this tournament. So you really need to start considering how you're going to build your decks in function to that. Now, I know this was a very generic discussion. I didn't give you guys hard answers. This was more so to open up how you guys need to start thinking about it from a general, overall design space. How does best of one pre-side think? Now, again, if you guys want specific cards that you guys should be considering for your sideboard, I definitely have that video prepared. If I lined up my videos properly, that one should have came out first. So you guys should have that ready to go. If you guys want to understand, okay, well then what decks do we play? Later this week, I'm going to be posting a DBS Fest meta video where we're going to be talking about the most predominant leaders specific to that meta and kind of get your head working around, am I going to be playing one of these leaders or do I play a rogue leader that's able to take on each of these strategies? So with that said, guys, I know this discussion was a little bit kind of more in the air. It wasn't very targeted, but it was kind of just general. How should I think about going into the best of one pre-sided world now that that's probably going to be the future of this game in terms of the most ways you're going to be able to play competitive DBS moving forward into 2022. If you guys like this kind of discussion, let me know in the comments below, guys. I know this was very generic, but I love talking design. I love looking at how something works and analyzing, well, then how does that make us think differently? If you guys like it, let me know in the comments down below. Let me know how you guys plan on tackling this best of one pre-sided meta. If you like these kinds of videos, give it a thumbs up. It'll really let me know where you like it. Hey, if you dislike it, those kind of works too. I mean, hey, anything goes the distance. If you watch more of these discussion videos, guys, subscribe button's in the corner. With that, I'll catch you guys on the next one.